So when the forum approached me about possibly putting together a design inspirations panel, I kind of looked at some of the old panels that had been done and thought, what can we do, that's different, that's fresh? And one of the things that's always kind of on my mind are who are the next up and comers? Who are the next leaders in their sort of individual realms of design? So the obvious, I think, choices were to go with architect, landscape architect, interior designer for me. But then I was like, wait a minute. I don't know as many interior designers that haven't already spoken. So I thought a lighting designer is really, what we should bring into the mix. And lo and behold, I didn't know this, but I think Jacob's going to be the first lighting designer that's ever spoken at the forum. So I was glad I did that. And with that, I'll introduce all three of them at once. This is going to be a little bit lengthy. Jacob Gerber is a senior lighting designer and partner at Essential Light Design Studio, and he's been a lighting designer for over 2 decades. His experience is in hospitality, education, commercial, houses of worship, and exterior environments. He's created many award-winning projects. In 2014, Jacob was awarded the IES Illumination Award of Excellence in Energy and Environmental Lighting Design for the colorful, programmable, and maintenance-friendly relighting of the Bank of America Tower in Dallas. Jacob's creative problem-solving, management of complex projects and demanding schedules, as well as his technical proficiency, produce outstanding results for his clients. He is a professional member of the AILD and an active member in North Texas section of the Illumination Engineering Society of North America. His design work has been published in LD+A, Hospitality Design, Architectural Digest, Texas Architect, Modern Luxury, Interiors Texas, and El Decor magazines. Jacob also teaches at the New York School of Interior Design, and he received his Bachelor of Science at the University of Oklahoma in Interior Design. Katie Martin is the next speaker. Katie is a landscape architect. She's a principal at the Dallas office of OJB. She's cultivated a passion for solving urban challenges through landscape throughout her career. Her experience in both public and private practice informs a comprehensive and pragmatic approach to design. She grew up in Dallas, or the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and she is especially interested in how people use parks, plazas, and streetscapes to build connections and express civic pride. A collaborator and consensus builder at heart, Katie is managing a wide variety of projects that feature sustainable practices. Her design work for complex, large-scale outdoor spaces prioritizes balancing ecological and humanistic layers. She joined OJB in 2021 after working for the city of San Jose on public space and park projects. I also mentioned that she worked for Olin Partners when she was in California for a while. She'll show you a project that might hint at that. And she earned a Master of Landscape Architecture from the University of Pennsylvania and both Bachelor and Masters of Architecture at Texas Tech University. Thirdly, but not last, Rizzi Faruqi is founding partner with Bang Dang of the award-winning Dallas-based modern practice Farr and Dang. The work of the firm is widely varied in typology and scale, but all projects share a rigorous focus on making modern spaces informed by a study of context, structure, and materiality. The firm's current work includes both custom and speculative dwellings within DFW and the surrounding regions, alongside various commercial and institutional projects. A rigorous and proactive research agenda and a passion for exploring ideas of modern spaces and contemporary lifestyles are the foundation of the firm's design process. Rizzi is a native of Dallas and studied architecture at the University of Texas at Austin. He began his career in Austin, followed by formative years of experience in the Netherlands with the Office of Metropolitan Architecture and in Dallas with Cunningham Architects, which is where I first met Rizzi. Rizzi and Bang are both professors in practice in the School of Architecture at UTA Kappa, where they have led both undergraduate and graduate level design and design build studios. And with that, Jacob, you're up.
Thank you so much, Biff. I'm quite honored to be here, and I'm grateful to be the first lighting designer asked to speak at the forum, so no pressure at all. What inspires me? This was such a big question. I found it quite challenging because inspiration is so innate to the design process that how often do you actually sit down and think about what inspires us as designers, much less what inspired us to be designers to begin with. I grew up in a very small town of 800 people in rural Oklahoma with, this is my small town. The upper right-hand corner is my family home. The rectangle in the middle is where I would walk to school every day, and my family farm was on the far left-hand side of the screen, 1 mile outside of town. My world was very small. It was surrounded by mostly ubiquitous architecture like round tops, lean-tos, hay barns, and farmhouses that were built between the 1890s and 1980s. One of the most interesting pieces of architecture near me was the teepee church designed by Bruce Goff in 1950. As a child, I had this natural curiosity about how things go together. I would take things apart all the time, and sometimes I would get them put back together. And I think this building held some fascination with me because it showed how the structure was being held up from the exterior of the building. And so I think that natural curiosity is what actually ushered me into wanting to make design a career for myself. When I left for college to study interior design, I remember my father pulled me aside and he said, "Do you think you can really make a living being an interior designer?" And honestly, I didn't know at the time. So how did a kid from a small town like this end up being a lighting designer in Dallas? Well, as part of school. My junior year of school, I took a lighting design course, and I took a field trip to Dallas where I went to my first lighting design studio I ever knew about. And that really was my first inspiration. It was my first time seeing good lighting design. Things like high contrast lighting design, glare-free apertures. I had no idea what any of this meant or how to use those tools. But what I knew was that the space that they were in and the spaces that they designed felt so good. This is where I learned that lighting affects how we feel in a space. It's really kind of hard to explain how deeply I'm connected with light. All creation on Earth evolved under two lighting conditions, the sun and the moon. The night and the day, the star, the moon, and the stars and firelight. Our eyes actually develop two visual systems, one that works during the day and one that works at night. Our bodies react to lighting in a primordial and foundational way. Photons will enter our eyes. They tickle our photoreceptors, sending electrical impulses to our visual cortex, creating our understanding of the world around us at the speed of light. The moon pushes and pulls at our tides. It keeps our planet alive. It even reflects the rays of the sun to the dark side of our planet, so that side is never truly dark. From the stars to the firelight that first gathered us together, light really shapes how we feel and how we connect. The firelight tells us where it's safe, where we can stay warm, and where we can see the faces of our friends. I believe that lighting design truly reveals architecture to us through shadow and light. Without shadow, there is no light, and without light, there is no shadow. As Louis Kahn put it, even a space intended to be dark should have just enough lighting from some mysterious opening to tell us how dark it really is. It's that contrast that helps us understand our world. As I continued to wonder about my inspiration, I began remembering these moments where the lighting hit just right, where I had to stop and take it in and maybe take a photograph. Here on a random hike in Austin back in 2022, I remember the intensity of the light falling into the forest floor. As the wind would blow, so does the lighting, creating a spiritual connection to the forest. I was in Oregon this past September. I went to Multnomah Falls, and while I was there to see the falls, I turned to leave and I saw this vista with a beautiful warm light on the right bank, contrasted by the deep shadows in the lower left and the cool colors of the sky and the mountain range in the back. I was there to see the falls, but the lighting just wasn't quite right. Like a poorly aimed art accent light, the light's off to the left and not onto the falls. So truly in nature, timing is everything. Here in Austin, I went to the Blanton Museum of Art and went to the Moody patio by Snowhada. They used the sun, the Austin sun, to create these dappled patterns of light onto the ground plane, which was really fun. I was there several years earlier to see the opening of the Ellsworth Kelly Chapel. In this space, the stained glass windows use the sunlight to illuminate the form of the interior of the chapel. I was fortunate enough to go to Barcelona and see Gaudi's Sagrada Familia. On a clear and sunny afternoon, the sunlight streams in, creating a striking and inspiring view. On closer look, Gaudi's use of textured concrete creates gradations of these chromatic hues that recall the colors of the forest in the fall. I'm a lighting designer, so I'm always looking up, whether at our ceilings or at the sky. Here, when I was on a run to Total Wine one night, crepuscular rays exiting this cloud took my breath away. It was beautiful. My colleagues and I enjoy looking at cloud photography so much. There's an organization called the Cloud Appreciation Society that will email you every week just photos of clouds. So definitely join if you're interested. Here at the Aurora Festival in Dallas in 2015, a light artist created this installation in a church using clouds of fog and chromatic lighting to create an immersive experience. I was fortunate enough to see this Olafur Ellison piece called Beauty 1993 when it came to the Dallas Museum of Art. I love how it's made of these ubiquitous ingredients like water and white light and a dark room. But the water breaks the light into its component parts, and the light makes the mist feel solid and vibrating. Here, Santiago Calatrava created the St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church in Manhattan. This building has a very powerful daytime to nighttime transition. It becomes a beacon of warmth and light and is the spiritual heart of Ground Zero. While studying interior design, I also received a minor in art history, so when I had the opportunity to go to Rome in 2009, I was very excited to see Bernini's statue, Ecstasy of St. Teresa. When I arrived, it was quite lackluster. The statue is lit by a skylight above, and it happened to be a rainy day in Rome, so it looked very flat and boring. But I noticed off to the side there was a little box with a €1 symbol on it, and when I put in my change, the light inside the skylight illuminated the art piece so beautifully. And now you can really appreciate the textures of the cloth and the humanity in the faces of the figures. So you may wonder, how do I bring inspiration like this into my projects? Well, I'm always looking for that opportunity to create something joyful and wonderful in the projects I work on. This is the Parish Episcopal School of Performing Arts. I designed the light fixtures on the interior of the building to shine through the glazing, to rake across the texture of the tilt wall panels. There's also light fixtures underneath the tilt wall panels, making that heavy architecture feel light and surreal. On the interior of that space, the same light fixtures create this beautiful pattern of rhythmic light to reinforce the rhythmic architecture. Here at Mikasina Clyde Warren Park, light grazes down the three-dimensional relief of black lava stone. It calls attention to the texture and the depth changes, but it also shows the saw marks of the material to recall how it's actually made and transformed. Here at Factory 603 in the West End, the historic water tanks deserved a layered lighting approach. We used pattern projectors, chromatic lighting, and even different color temperatures of white light to illuminate the tanks. Throughout the night, those layers slowly disappear so that by the early morning, only the ladders themselves are illuminated. Here at a corporate office project, the lighting blurs the boundary between interior and exterior. The porte-cochere wall is highly illuminated on the exterior of the building and slides into the lobby space beyond the glazing. The Crown Block restaurant uses many lighting layers, reinforcing the interior design of the space, but creating a memorable and interesting placemaking experience. At the Lamplighter School, lighting defines the form of the folded planes of the architecture. In the absence of light, there is no form. Louis Kahn said in architecture, light is the divine expression of form. It reveals the essence of materiality, casting shadows that narrate the beauty. Thank you all for listening to me. I hope that something in here has inspired you to think about lighting differently or to create some special moment of joy in the project that you're working on.
All right. I'm Katie Martin. And when they asked me to speak about inspirations, shocker, I thought about the land. So a little bit of a spoiler for you, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the land. So I watched the Inspirations panel with Amy Bartell from Studio Outside, and I think you're going to see some similarities for those of you who also attended that. I think as landscape architects, we look back and we see how much the land we grew up in influences how we position ourselves within the practice of landscape architecture. And so for me, for my family, it was this farm. It's in Grand Prairie, so not far from here, and they all called it the old home place, and it was kind of the root of our family and the seat of where everybody grew up. And so I grew up hearing stories about all the trouble that they'd get into on the old home place. And some of the things that I learned from my family, I never lived there, but I learned about stewardship, I learned about growing things, and I learned about sharing places with people. And that was something that was central to, I think, my whole family's identity, which really had a lot of influence on how I see things now, I think. And so what did I do? I went to Lubbock, where it's so flat, so very flat. And I thought that I was going to learn about architecture, and I thought this is what I was going to do, is learn about buildings, some really incredible buildings, and I was going to make little boxes. And instead, I had professors that taught me about site. This was, I think, don't judge too much. I think this is my second studio project. But we were studying plows and how plows turn the earth, and then how can you use that as inspiration for buildings. And so all of my projects ended up being about the site through the years, and I had this incredible professor that said, you know, all of your projects are about the site, Katie. Have you ever thought about studying landscape? And so I had never even considered it. So off I went to Pennsylvania, where it looks very, very different than Lubbock. So, and I had the opportunity to learn from some really incredible people. And one of them is John Dixon Hunt. And it was my first kind of landscape architecture history class. And coming from architecture, I thought I knew a lot. And then I joined this class and learned how much I didn't know. And so one of the things that John Dixon Hunt talks about is the ideas of different nature. So first nature is this wild and undisturbed place. And then second nature is it's agriculture. It's a little more organized, but it's still got a little bit of roughness to it. And then third nature is this idea of gardens, and it's very highly curated. And so with that, I also learned that there's even more gradients, right? So the bottom right picture is Thomas Jefferson's Ferme Ornée, and it's an ornamental farm. So it's meant to be both productive but also beautiful and inspiring. And so I started to learn about these different gradients. I also started reading J.B. Jackson because I was off in Pennsylvania and I thought, I don't know what this looks like in Texas, where I'm from, and I wanted to understand that. And so I started reading J.B. Jackson, and one of the quotes that he has is, "Landscape as history made visible." And I think that's one of the things I love so much about my profession. But I graduated, and all things come to an end, and I had to figure out what does it mean in practice to be a landscape architect and to be inspired by the land. And so I had this opportunity to work for a little fruit company out in California and get to help be part of designing their new campus. And the place that we started in trying to understand what would it look like is the California landscape. And so starting with the big picture and looking at these incredible landscapes all around us, but not just that, looking at the cultural layer too. So this is in the Cupertino area. This is called the Valley of Heart's Delight, and it used to be where all of the fruit came from, or most of the fruit in the U.S. came from, and it was grown and canned here. And so it plays this incredible role of the culture of this area. And so I had this amazing opportunity and I got to learn so many things. Some of that, though, is also how to create wildness. How do you start developing something that can take on a life of its own? How do you create this moment in between kind of that second and third nature and curate it? Another thing we were able to do is overlay that cultural heritage and allow it to reveal the history of this place on the campus for people who work there every day. And so I finally made it back to Texas, and I got to work on this incredible project at Aggie Park. For those of you who know College Station, it's across the street from Kyle Field. And so one of the things that was really incredible about this project is it kind of took its cues from the land. So there was this channel that went through the park that was handling a lot of the stormwater. And then the students used it mostly for recreation. But you can see on the image on the right what it looked like before. And I worked with this amazing team that responded to that to create a different way of handling stormwater that could also be an amenity and be a beautiful place to spend time. One of the things about college football, and this is across from Kyle Field, is that there's a lot of tailgating. And so again, like not just looking to the land, but the cultural overlay. How do we allow for the many uses that need to take place at this park? How do we have large events, but also how does it feel good every day? How can it be a place where students come and gather and use it as an outdoor classroom? It's become this gathering place. It's become a fishing hole. It's become so many things to people who use it in very different ways. And so the last project that I'll talk about is a corporate campus. It's up in Westlake. It's a site that has many layers. It has this really rich history of Blackland Prairie, but it also has a ranching history. And then it's got now this corporate office campus kind of overlay to it. And so how do you marry all those things together? So we started to look at how the site was organized. We have a lot of topography on the site. So how do we think about water? How does water move? How can we keep the outside edges wild? And then as you come in, we're kind of curating this learning loop and then a central prairie. And so I'm going to show some renderings, and part of that's because it's still in construction. So one of the things that we thought about is like as you move out from the buildings, how does it go from being very curated to being very loose? And how do you access the nature when you're standing next to the building and you can see the wildness? We tried to have a very light touch. So everything is about the land and the ecology. And then I just want to also say that as a landscape architect, my favorite thing is when projects really get built. And so it's one thing to talk about nature and talk about the land, and it's another thing to really see the fruit of all of that come to life. And so I'm just going to return to the J.B. Jackson quote and thinking about landscape as history made visible. And I just think, what a privilege it is to get to reveal the layers of a place and then to add a layer of our own. And I think that's what landscape architects do every day. Every site is new, and so I think every site brings new inspiration. And so I hope that some of that has maybe inspired somebody else. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rizzy.
Thank you, Katie and Jacob, for the inspiring talks, and thank you to Biff and Nate for the invitation to be here today. After being invited by Biff, I considered a lot about things that inspire how I practice, thinking about influential travel, films, buildings, and texts. But I kept returning to what felt most formative to my everyday and what was most influencing and still inspires how I work. And for that, it was the path that brought me here, those experiences learning and living architecture. And so this is the abbreviation of that path. My beginnings in architecture started at the University of Texas in Austin in the late 90s, a transformative era where postmodernism was firmly giving way to bold new movements in both buildings and theory. Graves and Moore yielded to Herzog and Gehry 2.0, comings of metamodernism and new deconstructivism. Works like the Signal Box, Bilbao, Sendai Mediatek, Diamond Ranch High School spoke to new possibilities, and as a student, were fascinating and inspiring. Many seminal texts emerged at the time also, and most infectious for me was the encyclopedic work SML-XL, cataloging the work of the Office for Metropolitan Architecture, and presented in ways unlike any architectural text before it. It energized my student mind so much that when my chance to apply for the professional residency program at UT arose, I sent off a portfolio, crossed my fingers, and with some persistence, but with no place to live and no work visa, left Austin for Rotterdam. Drawn in also by the inventive work and strong creative energy of younger practices throughout the Netherlands, such as MVRDV, Neutlings, and Will Aerts. Deeply interested in how research and a rigorous conceptual process could respond to architectural briefs with specificity and exploration. As a 20-year-old student, the chaotic studio office was sort of an architectural Disneyland, just one that never seemed to close and where no one really left. It was deeply educational, informative, with an infectious energy of small teams, horizontally structured, and feeding off of one another. My time there focused on a small unbuilt house in the Bahamas, where each room was distributed as pavilions with connecting paths to activate the entire site with smaller scaled interventions, allowing each space to uniquely respond to their program, yet be unified by a common materiality and prefabricated structural components. Being in the office at the time while concept and production of milestone projects such as the Casa de Musica in Porto and the Seattle Central Library radically expanded and inspired my early grasp of architectural possibilities. Seeing them built only further cemented it. In our work, exploration and dissecting a brief have become integral. For a small house in Santa Fe, New Mexico, we dove into critical studies, merging program and context, all of which yielded a boomerang-like form, responding to optimal sightlines to the surrounding mountain ranges, the solar path across the site, and a clear organization of shared and private spaces. Returning from the Netherlands to graduate and spend time with family in Dallas, the work of Cunningham architects really spoke to my recent experience. Still what for me, and in my opinion, is an under-recognized body of work and range of work that embodies an inventiveness that was responsive and conceptually clear. At that time, Gary's Casa Caja, then his own home, was finishing construction and became for me a permanent inspiration. Site-cast tilt wall panels, erected and built behind the original home that set up a framed courtyard, constructed by Gary himself and a lot of labor by some people that are probably here tonight, with brutal, honest materials and detailing, and I believe probably not one piece of sheetrock anywhere to be found. It took me 3 years to get a job there, learning a lot in between, and coincidentally enough, it was my now business partner and then close friend, Bang, who called me about an opening in the office as he would be departing. But fortunately for the office, he returned several months later, and we'd spend the next 5 years working next to one another. Working with Gary and the amazing teams in the office was and remains continually inspiring. Across many scales on projects built and unbuilt, all highly specific to their programs, users, and budgets, laid many of the foundations for how our office conceives, builds, and collaborates today. For a small ranch campus in the northern Texas Hill Country, we employed a simple language of adaptable and expandable modules, bays that were developed to meet a variety of programmatic needs, with sibling repeating structural section and roof profiles tailored to a series of buildings, all linked by a common material palette that references the historic vernacular buildings of the region, and that were selected for their economy, durability, and longevity. One last formative and current inspiration for me is our collaboration as an office and everyone that's part of that experiment. We view the office as a project itself, and the daily exchange of ideas and information grounds everything that we do in a dialogue of how we continually improve our practice and how we practice. For a residence set on a small lakeside peninsula in DFW, the home is quiet and private to its quiet street front and cul-de-sac with a mostly opaque precast concrete facade. Organized in 3 linked programmatic bars, the opposite side fully engages the site in context with expansive glazing and overhangs towards the primary view. An adaptively scaled base system and simple materiality and structure anchor the bars to the land and levitate the view above the shoreline. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. That turned out even better than what I had imagined it would. In fact, when I got their presentations a couple of days ago, I was like, this is really going to be good. And it really was. A lot of insight there. So I'll start us out with a quick question or two, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Where's the next place you're going to travel?
Puerto Vallarta in January to get away from the winter.
There you go.
I think actually I'm returning to the Netherlands for the first time in 20 years for Christmas and New Year's.
Nice and cold.
And
I've been doing a lot of traveling lately, so I'm actually enjoying just being here for a minute, but I'm sure that I have another adventure on the horizon.
Fair enough. One more sort of pie in the sky question, or random question, I guess. But what is the next book you're going to read? Or are reading? Let me stretch that a little further.
I'm reading a series of short stories by Immortals, so, which, if you haven't read him, he's just a fantastic author and writer. So, it's not architecture, but.
I'm taking suggestions, but we have a huge stack. Well, usually what happens during the holidays is we accumulate a lot of architecture books like architects do during the year, but never have time to read them. So we have massive stacks in the office untouched, and so I think this holiday season I'll be going through those.
So this is really dumb, but I have been hanging out with my niece who is obsessed with dark romance novels. Anybody? Nobody?
My nieces are younger than that.
Okay. Yeah, so I will be delving into a nice dark romance novel soon.
All right. Does anyone in the audience have any questions that they'd like to ask the panel?
For the first lighting designer here at the forum, it goes into the reason I want to ask. Also, being in the lighting world, a lot of people assume architects do the lighting design. And no offense to architects, but they don't do a very good job of it. But that also means that lighting design is kind of put on the back burner, or I should say, it's not valued up front. And no offense, Far, but that last photo you showed, I noticed this incredible lighting, the accent of it, of just really standing out. And my question to you, Jacob, is how do you get people to understand your value, or how do you show your value as a lighting designer to people that may have not engaged a lighting designer before?
I find lighting very challenging in that regard, because I can't show you a light fixture and you know what it does or what value it brings to your project. You have to experience that. I find that the people we work with who value lighting design, they come back, they're return clients. And so the best way to get people to understand is to take them to projects and let them see the difference and experience and really feel the difference between that space and other spaces they've worked or created with. So for me, seeing is always believing. You have to be in those spaces to understand the value of it. And then once you understand the value, you want to bring it to every project you're working on. And some of those don't have the budgets for them, and some of them do, but yeah.
Just, I guess, a generalized question, but how do you think of your projects, not just on the day that they open, but how they mature, or will age or continue over time? What do they look like in years or in generations down the road? Does that factor into at all what you do?
Yeah.
That's a landscape question.
It is a landscape question. I was trying to give the guys a chance. I think, to me, no offense, but I think buildings look the best the first day that they open, and I think landscapes look the worst the first day that they open. And if you do it right, it grows in over time, and you're thinking about how it matures and changes. And I think the other thing that is great when you have clients that you have good relationships with and you work with over time, as the landscape changes, you have an opportunity to come in and adjust things. As you have these trees that mature and shade out what's below them, you can come back in and make those tweaks, and it's always evolving and changing over time. So, landscape's an easy answer on that one.
Yeah. Well, I think I would just second that, because landscape and lighting both over time help our projects grow and evolve and improve and consistently look better than the day they opened even. And I think for us, it's just about thinking about the longevity of the materiality and making sure that we, push for things that will have that long life cycle and hopefully look as good as the landscape later.
Yeah, and when it comes to lighting design, we rely on facilities managers to maintain our aesthetics. So that is quite a challenge, but it does force you as a designer to think about, is this design maintainable? And what will it look like 10 years from now, or even 2 years from now? So yeah, it's definitely a design consideration from the beginning.
So her question was, how do you realize the strange, the wonky, the unusual in your projects, and convince your clients to build those projects really in a somewhat conservative environment here in Dallas, especially the development environment, I would say?
Yeah, I think for us, it kind of comes from a different angle, because it always starts with the program and the site and all the fundamental things, and the wonkiness sort of evolves out of the dialogue. It may be a subconscious part of the agenda, but it's not really a driving part of the agenda that we're trying to sell. It happens, I think if the other things make sense and are thoughtful and logical, then it can come together in any way, right? Or in a number of different ways. So I think it's kind of indirect in that way, but I think in some ways maybe because of those reasons, we just don't feel like we have to sell that part in a strange way. It sounds like it doesn't make sense, but somehow it comes together.
I think for me, a lot of the time, we are a service-based industry. We work for our clients. And I think the story has to become the client's story. And so I think clients need to feel ownership and feel like a part of the design process so that it becomes their story and it feels authentic to them and to their place. And so I think that's a big part of it. And then the other piece of it is we do a lot of visualization. Because we're designers, I think we think very spatially, and not everybody thinks that way. And so it's really important to show them like what it can look like through drawings or models or things like that, so that they aren't surprised when they come out to the site and it's built.
So from a lighting design perspective, I completely agree with you, what you said about like the client. You have to listen to the client, and what we have to do is convince the client that's what they want, right? So that's all part of it. But I will mention, lighting is the first thing to get cut. Like your trees go from 6-inch calipers to 4 very quickly. Just like my lighting budget gets cut in half a lot. And so maybe that means we have one special moment instead of 3. Or sometimes we'll do mock-ups in real life, because you can't, visualization softwares don't render lighting very well. So we may do a mock-up at night, like we did that project over in Fort Worth, where we took every light fixture we proposed on the job out to the park. We had all of the people there to show them, this is what this graze is going to look like. This is what this handrail light's going to look like. And again, when they see it, they believe it, and they get behind it, and that helps us maintain our original vision for the project.
Not looking for a common denominator in your work, but finding one in this kind of profound curiosity that all of you have in the presentation. How do you promote that in your practices and the people that you work with? Do you find yourself consciously promoting that curiosity, or by reputation those curious are drawn to you? How do you find that working in your practice?
Well, if you've never nerded out with a group of 8 lighting designers, you are missing out. I mean, we could riff for hours about anything and everything. So it's really a culture in our office that's important to us, and we promote it, and we make space for it to happen. I think that's the key, is making sure there's space for it.
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. I think creative people and energetic people are attracted to work that's creative and energetic. But I think we also look for a special something when we bring people into the team. It was interesting because I was on an interview the other day, and one of the things we said is we're always looking for motivated and interesting people, no matter what the job description is. If you're an interesting person, we can find a place for you. We can put you to work. So I think it's a little bit of that. And then I think the other part is trying to mentor a team and to help find those moments. We have gone out and gone to a meadow preserve. How do we find time in our very busy schedules to still talk about things? And I think sometimes it's a challenge, but it is a priority.
Yeah, I think for us, with architecture projects that are built sort of speak to certain people and they don't, so it does draw people in. But for us, it starts there, but that doesn't sustain it. So we're, I think, always trying to reinforce it, or it reinforces itself through our kind of working process. And so, it's about kind of the dialogue in the office and kind of a constant sense of collaboration. And, constantly there's just architecture everywhere, whether it's books and discussions and everybody being involved.
Questions about AI for those of you in the back, if you couldn't hear that. So it's how do you embrace it or not?
Well, what I currently love about AI is that it doesn't understand the laws of physics. And so you can get this beautiful and amazing lighting rendering out of it, but it's absolutely impossible to pull off in the real world. So when we live in the metaverse, it's going to be great, but when we live in the real world, it's kind of difficult. So it actually puts us in a difficult situation, because I'll have an architect come to me and say, this is what we want it to look like, and I have to break the bad news that it's physically impossible to do. Now we can get as close as possible to it, but it does bring up some dilemmas like that. It is a good iteration tool, though, if you're stuck and you need 30 quick options to kind of explore it, get your juices flowing and mind working. But yeah, it can be problematic for us.
I have mixed feelings about it. I think I saw a meme the other day that for AI to work for architecture, you have to have a client that can clearly articulate what they want. And so I think that's, I think for me, like, part of what we bring is the ability to have the conversations, you know, and to help a client see what they want. And realize that the thing for me that I find really useful about AI is quick research. So especially, you know, for a landscape, every site you go to could be a different plant community, right? Every site has its really unique, you know, influences and ecology. And so it's really helpful for speeding up that process so that we can get to a really amazing plant palette faster. Now, I think there's still a lot of like fact checking and curating, and then there's the design aspect of like, just because it's like in a list doesn't mean that it's the right plant for this project. So.
Yeah, I think very simply for us, it's just kind of another tool in the tool belt we have to embrace and learn how to use in the right way.
Sorry, a follow-on to that question. Are your clients beginning to play with AI such that their requests for you are different, or their expectations for you are different? And I know you, the lighting designer, have actually addressed this, but just speaking more from an end-client standpoint, I'm wondering if they're putting more pressure on you, or you know, what they're coming to you showing versus what they did 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think I would say we've been expecting that, but have yet to experience it. But it's probably right around the corner.
Yeah, I think if anything, we're probably the ones that drive some of that more than our clients are necessarily. I do think, I think it's more of an iterative tool for us to do our work more quickly right now.
I have a question, and I'm thinking about lighting design as I ask this, but I think it could be a broader question for everyone. But I'm thinking, when you were showing your lighting presentation, and it seemed like there was a real emphasis on drawing attention to, like, you know, the materials or the sculpture, the shadows, that sort of thing, and the lighting is really working with the surroundings. I'm thinking, do you ever have opportunities where you just like make the lighting itself like the focal point, or you know, the interesting point in the room, speaking from the perspective of someone who lives in a 3-bedroom ranch style tract house, where maybe I don't want to draw attention to, you know, certain things. Just wondering about that.
Yeah, light can certainly become sculpture or become art itself, right? I've done several custom decorative fixtures in my career and never made a single penny on any of them because it is so fun, time-consuming, and complicated, but they're very rewarding experiences to do so. It's also really hard because you have to get into the mind of your client to understand exactly what their aesthetic is, what you're looking for, what the goal of it is, and making sure that the materiality works with where you go. One of my favorites was, and it's still there, this has been 15, 20 years ago now, the Uncle Julio's in Grapevine has this beautiful custom chandelier that's made of stuff that the client found at the market in Mexico. And we took it, illuminated it, created a composition. There's 5 pendants, but each one is dropped differently and rotated slightly differently, so it looks like a big mass of things hanging from the ceiling like a Mexican market, and it's really beautiful and lovely. So those experiences are very rewarding but time consuming for sure.
I think the landscape equivalent is like traces of the water, you know, going through the site, and how do you like reveal the traces of the water or make it its own feature. And I think, you know, I've seen a lot of projects do both really successfully, but that's kind of what I'm thinking of, is like, how do you reveal those like traces, as I hear you talk about like the light revealing things, or it becomes its own object. And I think that for a landscape, that might be the kind of parallel.
I think our only parallel is sometimes trying to get the building to show up less and let landscape and lighting take over.
That definitely came from Gary Cunningham, who couldn't be here tonight. He's not feeling well then. Anyway.
A little bit of a follow-up to that, I'm curious how each of your focuses would influence each other. Like if you're doing architecture, do you think about the lighting or the landscape of the building, or how that would work?
Yeah, I guess I would think kind of just in our work, we try to have a consideration of all those aspects and bring those team members together when we have the opportunity as early as possible. And, you know, for example, some of the first projects early on for me when we were working with Hawker or with Biff, it's like we kind of want them there before we even decide where the building's going to go, and so that there's a dialogue and an understanding of all the potential of everything and the site. And I think, you know, at a certain stage, lighting would play right into that.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think watching Rosie's presentation, you're definitely the architect that I went to architecture school to be. And so it's really fun to watch your buildings, and even just like your inspirations are people that I'm also inspired by. And I think for landscape and architecture, part of the reason that I ended up where I did is I love when the building touches the ground. And I think there's so many different ways that a building touches the ground and lands on the ground. And so for me, that's like one of my favorite things, is that, you know, interface, and how do you address that in a really beautiful way? Is the landscape slipping under the building? Is it coming up to it? And so for me, I think that interchange of like where the building ends and the landscape begins is one of my favorite parts of what I do. And I will say too, I've gotten to work with Jacob on a project, and I think same thing with the lighting, how it illuminates the building. One of the things we like to do is put lights up in the trees that can mimic the moonlight on the ground. And so we were talking before this presentation about just how much fun it is to see dappled light on the ground, whether it's in the day or in the evening. And so I think that for a landscape, we really do have to consider the architecture and have to consider the light and how that's addressed.
Yeah, I think my story is a little bit different because I'm actually relying on the things that you all create before I can do my job. So I'm constantly looking for those opportunities that you create to bring them to life at night. And while you might be thinking of those spaces in a daytime view, in my mind it's completely dark until I put my first source there. And so it really is that revealing of the things that you've created, using light to do that. And that's so fun and exciting to me. I'm always looking for those opportunities.
I just wanted to ask y'all how you guys maintain creative excitement when budget is shifted and can cut some of the key factors and displays originally intended for the design and the projects when y'all are designing it.
I will just say, I think the VE process is the most creative process we do on any project. It's honestly kind of one of my favorite things not my favorite thing to have to VE, but to try and figure out how to keep the soul of a project and at the same time hit the budget that we need to hit. And for a landscape, we have a cheat because plants grow. And so one of the tools that we can use is to let the plants grow and put smaller plants in. But I think that is one of the more creative problems that we solve on any project.
I think I would agree to that sometimes the creativity that comes out of certain restraints sometimes brings great surprises. But I think also for us, a lot of the times there are parts, like if we do our job right, a lot of things are separate from the budget, meaning that if we address sort of some of the client's main goals and get the concept and the layout and the program right, you know, there's 10 different materials sometimes that we can employ, or certain things that maybe are less connected to dollar amounts that still can make a great project.
Yeah, I think I just echo what you said. The VE process is very creative to try to fit everything into that bucket. But I think what we do as designers in my office is that we budget from the very beginning of the project. We don't put a set of drawings out that we don't know the price. And so we know exactly where the value sits. We know what's expensive. And oftentimes it's counterintuitive. Like those special moments you want to keep. But if you've got a package of 500 downlights, you can change the cost by $10 and make a big difference to the bottom line. So we try to keep budget in mind during the entire process so that we're not caught in a big VE problem later on. So
There's one more question.
So my question would be, how does control, maintenance, and user experience direct your creative approach?
well, I'll say, you know, we struggle, especially with the comment about UX design, we struggle because lighting control manufacturers are usually computer programmers, and so of course they understand all of it, but how does the end user get to understand and use their own interface? So we get into the UX design a lot to make sure that the way the controls actually work are user-friendly, so it's intuitive to understand. But that's definitely part of the final portions of the design process when we actually go on site and tell the programmers what to do with those input devices.
I'll say for me, I've had, you know, the really amazing good fortune to work on some very big budget projects, and they also had big budgets for operations and maintenance. But I also worked for the city of San Jose for 4 years, and they did not have big budgets for maintenance. And so you did really have to get creative with the design process in anticipation of a limited maintenance budget. You know, so when you're doing a playground, are you putting like a little bubble at the end of the slide because you know they're going to have to replace that, and at least it will look intentional when they come back and replace it? You know, thinking about colors and how you're being really strategic so that when maintenance occurs, it looks like it was part of the design, and it doesn't look like, oh, they had to rip this out and replace it, you know, every 5 years. And so I think when you work on a limited budget and you know the challenges that the maintenance team is facing really intimately, it really does change the way you think about design.
Yeah, I think I would say for us it's very similar in terms of trying to have those considerations in the beginning and try to create low maintenance solutions wherever it's possible within the realm of the budget. And you know, I think we're lucky in some ways to develop really strong relationships with a lot of our clients and go and see projects down the road and be involved in them later, and you know, at a minimum learn a lot of things from that process and just continually improve how we make those decisions.
With that, I think we've got to end. I'm sorry. Nate's pulling the plug on me. I'm going to blame you. But thank you all for coming out, and thank you guys especially for participating and agreeing to this.